This is No One Teaches You This, a podcast for tech leaders who've had to figure things out as they go. No one's taught them what to do, but hopefully them sharing their story will help you along the way.
It's just about reasonable and fair sort of working practices, whether you're a neurodivergent or not. The way you manage people, the way you have conversations with your team is about what is fair for everybody, whilst recognising that certain people need certain extra things. Just making those reasonable adjustments, whether you're neurodivergent or not, I think is for me, is good practice.
There is a very realistic chance you will be managing somebody you've never seen.
I think it's, again, recognising where their limitations are. Can you work around those limitations? And if you can't, finding a way in which you can manage them.
Welcome to No One Teaches You This. Today we're joined by James Nunnerley, who's the engineering manager at Twinkl. James's chosen subject was managing neurodiverse employees. Now, a potentially controversial subject, but James really explains it in great detail, talks about his experiences, talks about how if you're a leader managing neurodiverse engineers at the moment, how you can make it a really great place for them to flourish within their role. I look forward to you hearing the conversation and hopefully it can help you. James, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Really
Nice to be here. Yeah.
No, fantastic. Do you want to give us a quick overview and introduction to yourself and your chosen topic?
Yep. So James Nunnerley, PHP developer by trade, going back 20-something years, self-taught, which also makes it interesting. And then I've worked in various companies as sort of developer, senior developer. Was at a company called Local for a while, was sort of their senior, I was actually director of IT, but basically senior technical person. And then now at a company called Twinkl, where I'm one of their engineering managers. Okay. And then, topic for today, which is quite an interesting one, could be politically hot topic, is just about sort of engineers coming in and the recognition that a lot of them are neurodiverse. And whether that be, ADHD, autism, all of the different sort of fields that flow around that. And sort of over the years, now looking back, I've realised actually quite a lot of the engineers I've worked with, either have worked for me or I've worked with, have probably been on that sort of neurodivergent spectrum. And then sort of being able to look at it now, sort of partly retrospectively, but also partly looking at sort of where children growing up now are sort of coming in particular, my son, who's not got formal diagnosis, but definitely is in that sort of neurodivergent world, and how they're going to come into the world, perhaps IT, perhaps other industries, and how we can look after them better.
Yeah, it's a really, it's quite a scary world that these people
completely
into. And the landscape's changing all the time. And I think it's important for us to say as well that, terminology in this area, I'm going to try our best.
We'll do our best to get it right.
But all this is just two people talking, sharing their experiences. So if we get it wrong, bear with us a little.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's part of the scary bit of it, is that a lot of people perhaps don't talk about it in public because they're scared of getting either terminology wrong or stereotyping certain people and stuff like that. Whereas actually, I think it's better to talk about it openly. And if there are people out there that perhaps know the technical terms better, they can then just sort of say, actually, you've got this wrong. What you should say is this. But actually, in reality, as long as you're talking about it in a positive way and looking at how we can help whoever it is, whether they're a 60-year-old engineer who's been around the, back in the Pascal days or something like that, or, a child coming through school at the moment who is perhaps scared about what might come for the future.
Yeah, I think this conversation is going to help twofold. There's sort of two audiences for this. I think you're right. One audience is someone who is neurodiverse in a tech team at the minute and find it difficult. The other audience is a tech leader who's trying to navigate this new landscape and I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't got the understanding or education around it. I don't know where I should start. So I think share some experience.
And also I think there's probably recognition now that a lot of senior technical people are probably neurodivergent themselves. And I've looked back on it myself, and a couple of people, including my mum, have sort of said, well, you probably fall into that category as well. I'm like, really, do I? Because you don't, I think when you're looking at it, sort of insularly, that's a word, you don't necessarily recognise unless there are absolute traits, you don't necessarily recognize that you're perhaps sitting into that neurodiverse world yourself.
Well, it wasn't talked about, was it?
No.
At all.
No.
Back in the day. And there's been a huge rise of look at statistics, especially within men being diagnosed with ADHD far later in life.
Yeah.
Well. It's a massive, massive topic. Before we were talking, you were sharing a little story about a little bit about your wedding with your son, and also that leading into schools at the moment.
Yeah. So got married a few weeks ago, and son was there, and it's absolutely fantastic. But there was sort of a couple of moments where he perhaps struggled with sort of the number of people there and the noise in particular. And he just took himself away, which was absolutely brilliant. Then obviously I couldn't just walk out and go and look after him. So I had a couple of friends who sort of kept an eye on him while he was just having that break. But actually I was then sitting down with that group of friends the following day who were all sort of similar age, late 40s, have all got kids ranging from 18 down to 7, 8, I think. And there's about 12 children in that group. And of that 12, 8 of them have either had a formal diagnosis or will probably get a formal diagnosis of some form of neurodivergency. And I think there's just following on that sort of conversation around actually why are there so many people now either getting those labels in later life, or actually there's a far higher, I think, percentage of children coming through schools, and we're probably seeing it coming into the technical world now, who are probably neurodivergent. And, I can think of probably 4 or 5 people who I've worked with over the last sort of 5 years, some of whom you've helped me recruit, who you would very much say, yes, are definitely on the neurodivergent spectrum. And that's a difficult word to say. And it's then, I think, as a parent, and you'll know yourself, is you're always trying to do the best for your child, and then just trying to pick schools and stuff like that to work out what's the best schooling option. And do you go private? Well, yes, if you've got the money. But I looked at a school recently, and it was £10,000 a term. So you're looking at 30 grand a year. Well, that's probably double most people's mortgages. And the other research I've done around schooling has been around, actually, are private schools the right place? Yes, they have smaller classes, but if you want that extra support, you've got to pay for it. If you want one-to-one or stuff, you've got to pay for it on top of the normal fees you're paying. So then talking 40, 50 grand a year. And yes, you want your best for a child, but it's got to be affordable. You've got to you've got to have a house over your head. You've got to put food on the table. So then you start looking at, right, what's the best state schools? Well, the state schools, even if they are on probably the severe spectrum of neurodiversity, state schools where they're special schools really look after the extreme, but they're not getting enough funding. And then state schools, just sort of the normal mainstream one, yes, they've got things in place, and the school my son's at has been really great and really supportive, and they have a specific unit that provides support, but they can't do everything. So you've then got to write, what can I do at home to help them? And it just, it's an ongoing thing. But that's sort of about schooling, which I could talk for hours, and it's not necessarily what we're about today, but it does have relevance.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we're seeing that now, that is going to filter into the workplace even more than what it is right now. Yeah. So the future leaders, whilst this is a, don't want to say the word issue, but it is something that leaders are having to deal with right now, and probably don't have the knowledge to know how to deal with very well. It's going to become more prevalent. So it's something that we always need to talk about. I'll ask you a question you might not know the answer to. Why do you think there is more neurodivergence coming through?
I think there's 2 factors in my view. One is the fact that there is far more recognition of it, and therefore, and to use that horrible word, labeling, there is far more labeling, whether it's autism, Asperger's, ADHD, all of those sort of labels that exist. I think that's one factor. The other factor is, and I don't know the answer to this, but I think there are just more children and people coming through life who are more neurodivergent. I cannot explain what it is, but I'm sure the stats will, I don't have the stats to hand, but I'm sure they will say, actually, yes, coming through schools at the moment, there is a far higher number of children who are on that neurodivergent spectrum. Why is it different now from when you or I were at school 30, 40 years ago? I don't know. Yes, there were, I can think of in the school that I grew up in, there were sort of 2 or 3 children that you would probably say now were definitely on, quote, the spectrum, to use that awful word. One of them was dyslexic, who I still know now, and he went to a dyslexic school and did really well. But again, that was a private school, but that was probably not the norm. Whereas now it feels like the norm is a child is getting, more and more children are getting labelled with sort of being neurodivergent and needing that extra support. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know what's causing it, but there is definitely something causing it, or that has changed in the 30, 40 years since you or I were at school.
Are you worried about your son going into the workplace?
It's interesting. I think it depends. A lot of it will depend what he ends up doing. Interestingly, he's taken an interest in IT, as he would. Yeah. I think it will all depend on what he's doing. And I another topic that I talk to many people about is homeworking. And the sort of last few jobs I've had over the last sort of 6-7 years, where there's much been, obviously COVID has sort of caused that, where there's been much more homeworking or requirement to work from home, and bringing in younger junior people into that sort of homeworking world, I think is a lot tougher than having, somebody sat on the desk next to you, and if they've got a question, they just lean over and ask. Am I worried about him? Yes. But I think a lot of that will just depend what world he goes into in terms of what industry. If he ends up in IT, then hopefully he's got me that I can, help him, sort of get into that world. But I think if he ends up if he ends up at another area, he might end up is sort of chefing or cooking or something like that, which again is something he's got an interest in, which again is a very much in-person, direct person. You've got to go in, you can't do much of it from home type thing. That I think will be a lot easier for people, that sort of world. But I think in the world of IT, where depending on who you talk to, homeworking is here to stay, I think it's going to be much more difficult. But for people who are neurodivergent, homeworking is seen as a benefit, because then they, some of them where they are socially, they find social situations more difficult. Actually working from home is a lot easier for them. But then you've got the balance of, right, if they're home working, you still want to see the output, and body language, I think, is hugely important when you're talking to somebody. A lot of neurodivergent people don't like having their camera on. So you're then sort of asking the questions, right, how are they reacting? Well, if they've got a camera turned off, you're stuffed, because you can't tell what body language they're you can't even tell where they are. But that's, you've got to have your trust in the people who you're working with. But when you're trying to have a conversation with somebody, whether it's one-to-one or in a meeting, actually having a camera on, I think, is quite important. But you need to recognise that for certain people, actually having a camera on or being publicly seen by other people is quite difficult. And there's somebody who works at the company I work at the moment has created an anime type character, so they don't have their camera on, but they have one of these clever avatar anime things that basically showing all their expressions and stuff like that. So you're not seeing them, but you're seeing some of their body language and movement, because it's being recognised by the camera, turned into the anime character, etc., etc. So it's a really interesting way of sort of getting round that. You need somebody to be on camera because it's just good practice, but they don't want to be on camera because they've got obviously understandable needs where they don't want to be on the camera, and it's sort of finding that balance of how you get them on.
That's a really difficult challenge, I think, for as a tech leader right now. You just said there, some people don't want to be on camera. Let's say you're in a fully remote working business. There is a very realistic chance you will be managing somebody who you've never seen, or don't see for months, maybe years.
Yeah, or even I've part of my team at the moment. I've got somebody who lives in Poland, and he's not going to come over to the UK, so I'm never going to meet him. Yeah, spend probably 1/5 of my time talking to him day in, day out, because he's part of the team that I'm talking to. And I, again, not wanting to go down a sort of red herring of talking about the goods or bads of hybrid or home working or stuff like that. But I personally think it's quite important to build relationships with people when you're managing them. And home working is a barrier to that, because you can't sit down. Like, I don't know how many times I've met you over the years, but got got to know you well enough that I can sit and talk to you on the phone. Whereas if you're doing that with somebody who you've never actually met in person, I mean, somebody in my team at the moment who I've now met quite a few times because he only lives up the road. But you sort of had just that really silly thing. You had the picture in your head of what you thought they would look like. And him, it was his height. And I sort of thought, oh, he's probably going to be, I'm 6 foot. He's probably just a little bit shorter than me. No, he's 6'4". I'm just like, oh, okay. Whoops. But it's just those simple things of in your head, sort of picturing what that person's like in real life, and that sort of whole body language and how all that fits in together when you're dealing with somebody day to day at the other end of a computer screen. It's again, not wanting to go down another red herring topic, but how COVID and the home working and the lack of social interaction people are now having, partly because of home working, partly because of COVID. And again, sort of looking at your children, my children's sort of age of where they've come through school and had those sort of COVID years, that's going to have a massive impact on them when they become adults, and how they, a lot of them are going to be much more socially difficult's the wrong word, but they're going to find social situations, probably working, a lot more difficult because they haven't come through that. I'm in a classroom, and there've got to be benefits of being in a classroom with, okay, maybe 30 other kids is too high, but that whole social interaction with your peers and just playing in the playground and that whole interaction and learning how to interact people. Well, children who sort of came through school over 2020, 2021, even 2022, they're going to have missed that sort of 2-3 years of learning how to interact. So again, that's going to have a big knock-on effect. And I think going back to the whole sort of neurodivergent sort of topic, is there going to be a recognition that when a certain bracket of children who've come through school in COVID, are they going to be recognised perhaps as they get into their later teens that actually they're neurodivergent, but it's not because they, quote, have ADHD, autism, whatever, but it's because they haven't had that social interaction during the COVID years. And again, that's another sort of, spin-off on the whole neurodivergent conversation is, yes, there's diagnoses which are medically recognised and people have certain traits, but there's also going to be the environmental effects of when they were in school, they didn't have that sort of interaction for 2 years. And that's where you get that social awkwardness from as well.
Yeah, that's going to be huge. I think when an eventual proper report comes out about the impact of COVID, I'm seeing it play out with my daughter at the moment. She's 6, so she was, was she? Yeah, nearly 1, 2 was coming through. So we definitely saw that for a little bit. You mentioned now, obviously, we talk about not seeing potentially a team member that you're managing and building the relationship part. That's really difficult about seeing them. If a tech leader's listening to this now and there is somebody in their team, neurodivergent or not, who's not on camera and never seen them, how can they effectively build a relationship with that person?
I think it's difficult. And I think actually being a good manager, and I'm not saying I'm a good manager, not perfect by any means, but I think it's all about building a relationship. And I think if I think back to certainly 2 or 3 particular people I've worked with, it's been about initially getting to know them as a person on that one-to-one level. So rather than chucking them in the deep end at the team and getting them to, I don't know, present at a demo or something like that, actually just getting them to do that one-to-one and then sort of, in a way, building that confidence, both them in you, saying you know them and you recognize that they find these things difficult, but also giving them you the confidence in them that, right, you've got over that. Actually, I can't have my camera on. And yeah, they might not have the camera on every single meeting, but if you can get them to that comfortable, okay, there's recognition that for certain things I probably should have my camera on, whether it's demos or talking just within your team and sprint, the whole sort of sprint ceremony is an interesting one. Somebody I work with said for stand-ups, you had to have your camera on, which to me is, I prefer cameras on, absolutely, but there needs to be recognition out there that there are certain people who don't like their camera on, for whatever reason it might be. It might be neurodivergency. It might be because they've only just got out of bed, they're still in pajamas, haven't done their hair, that sort of thing. But I think a good manager regardless of whether that person's neurodivergent, just needs to work with their team members to build confidence in what they're doing. And junior developers, junior engineers will be exactly the same. They might not have, regardless of whether they're neurodivergent again, they might not have the confidence to stand up in front of a group of 8 people in your engineering team to talk about the topic that they've done, because they're new to the world, they're junior, they sort of look up to these people, but actually building their confidence, getting into situations where they can do perhaps very small group sort of discussions or presentations or demos or whatever it is, and then just building that confidence out. And I think the same applies to the neurodivergent world, of just building somebody's confidence, getting them to a place where you recognize what their needs are, but they also recognize what the expectations are of them. And yes, you might need to work around what their particular difficulties are or stuff like that, and perhaps adjust those expectations, but still set where you can those expectations early on, so you can then build up that confidence.
Yeah. Can you think of a time where either you or a business you were a part of or somebody else in your team got it wrong when trying to manage somebody who was neurodivergent?
I can think of one occasion, this is going back 20 years, where a fellow developer was being asked by a senior member of management to present the latest project update or something like that. He was fairly new to the company, was what I would call your old-fashioned geek in the corner, preferred to sit in a darkened room. Whatever their personal things were, that was who they were. So actually the idea of them standing up presenting in front of 4 or 5 people, this would have been in the office back in the day. And basically he got not managed out of the business, but got made to feel so awkward because he wasn't prepared to do the presentations. He wasn't prepared to stand up in front of people, that he basically left because he was uncomfortable and found somewhere that was going to, and I think he was successful by moving away, because they were sort of the company he moved to recognized that he was a damn good developer, but just didn't want to sit in a room talking to lots of people, because that wasn't his thing at all. And I think going back to the question you asked before about good management of neurodivergent people, I think it's, again, recognizing where their limitations are. Can you work around those limitations? And if you can't, finding a way in which you can manage them. And yeah, in his case, the company just didn't do it at all, which is a shame, because he was a great developer. Thankfully, I ended up working with him about 5 years later, and we knew how he worked and what he was good at and what he didn't want to do. So yeah,
we spoke a lot about building up somebody's confidence, which I think is really important, especially in the neurodivergent world. I speak to so many developers, people within technology, who tell me they find it really difficult sometimes to disclose their neurodivergence, because they're worried about the repercussions of that, especially at interview stage and that type of thing.
I think interviewing's a really interesting one. And again, in this world of hybrid working where you're perhaps doing interviews over camera, I mean, I will probably personally expect somebody who's being interviewed to have their camera on. And I don't think that's unreasonable at an interview stage. But I've had one interview where actually the candidate was really good, but he refused to put his camera on. And it was just like, yeah, okay.
With AI now as well, that's making it.
AI is, again, an interesting topic on neurodivergency, which maybe we'll come on to later. But I think people coming into IT who are neurodivergent, yes, might find it hard to come out with sort of be honest and open. But I think, again, that's about good management. Yeah, if you can get them through the interview stage, job offer, they start, then having those one-to-ones and recognizing yourself as a manager, looking at the traits of someone. Now, that isn't about saying, yes, that person is X, Y, and Z label. It's actually personalizing the way you manage them to their, perceived needs and perceived traits, for want of a better word. Because, whether it's, whether I'm neurodivergent or not, I don't know. But, I have a way of doing things just like you have a way of doing things. Whereas, somebody might be coming in who's a great developer, but, is socially awkward. So you just need to recognize that. And I think, again, being a good manager is managing the person around what they are good at and trying to improve what they're not good at, but also recognizing that they might have traits which make certain things hard for them. And it's how you manage that. But that's the same with any developer, any person working for you, whether they're neurodivergent or not. You just need to recognize that some people who have, quote, neurodivergency will find certain things more difficult.
Do you think so these people who are worried about disclosing their neurodivergence, like especially interview stage, do you think, because they're worried about that's going to reflect badly on them and they might not get chosen, do you think that worry is real, honest opinion?
No, because certainly in an engineering world and taking on developers, some of the best developers I've worked with, you would say are neurodivergent, whether they've had a diagnosis or not. And again, I can think of 2 or 3, at least 2 of which that you've employed for me or you've sort of recruited for me that have been absolutely brilliant. But actually recognizing they were probably on the extreme end of things, but you were able to recognize from day one, just interviewing them, that yes, they were neurodivergent, but actually their skills were so good that it would be a waste not to bring them into the team. And I think, and certainly looking at structure of engineering teams now, which probably tend to be a bit smaller than they were 10, 15 years ago, actually managing those traits, those difficulties, whatever you want to call it, is a lot easier when you've got a slightly smaller team.
How do you make the place a comfortable place for them to work, for them to disclose? And the follow-up question to that is, do they even need to disclose when they're...
Well, so I'll answer the second question first, and the answer is no. I don't think they do, because I think what you do as a good manager is, again, talking about that traits thing, is you work with them based around their traits, what they're good at. And yes, if they've got weaknesses, how can you improve those? But actually, there are some things that you need as a manager need to recognize. So actually, a lot of companies are doing inclusion training and stuff like that for managers, which I think is really good if it's aimed at the right way and it's not just ticking a box, because actually it's trying to train managers to recognize where their team members might have, neurodivergent traits and how you manage that. And again, I think it comes down to that, to begin with, down to that one-to-one level of building that confidence between the two of you, so that that person feels comfortable that the way you're managing them is recognizing the difficulties and the traits that they have. So that's, do they need to be honest? No, because you should recognize it. What was the first bit? I've forgotten.
I've forgotten as well.
I think I probably answered it somehow.
Yeah, probably got in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So with interviews and in the workplace, a big thing that's being talked about in the neurodiverse community is around adjustments.
Yeah.
Sometimes in interviews, if somebody feels confident enough, they might ask for an adjustment. Now that might be, so we're in this very well lit room, that might be the lighting turned down. It might be, if it's a technical test, a bit of extra time or slightly different conditions to complete that test. That throws up the question of the word fairness.
So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think split them into 2. The physical lighting, well, yeah, fine. Absolutely do that, because you need to, if you want to get the best out of somebody, and this is in any industry, if you want to get the best out of somebody who's working for you, if there are reasonable adjustments you can make, and it might be having one half of the office lights off. I've been at a company where we did that. Actually, it was quite nice. Didn't just fall asleep, but it was quite nice, where you had sort of half the room and it wasn't quite so bright, but then the people, you basically just managed the office space, so the people who wanted to be in the bright areas were down one end and the people who want to be in the darker areas. I think, so that's the physical side. I think things like fairness around perhaps interview techniques and stuff like that, I think it's more difficult. Yes, you can make allowances for perhaps them spending a bit longer doing it. Now, most tech tests now, I suspect in interview stage, you're left just to do it home alone. So you can spend that time and effort. AI is an interesting one. Come on to that in a minute. Yeah. I think outside of that, I think, again, a lot of it will come down to when you're doing a tech test. Yes, you get them to do the tech test, but you then need to follow it up with what you might, a technical interview or a pairing conversation about the work they've done and stuff like that, because that's actually where I think you get most of the output or the benefit of doing that technical test from is having the conversation around it. Because, and then to bring on the conversation of AI, anybody can talk to ChatGPT and say, program me, develop me an HTML website with some JavaScript in the background that does X, Y, and Z. Anybody can do that, but the sign of a good engineer nowadays is, yes, they can use AI to speed up that process, but they can then still talk about what it is the AI engine, whatever you want to call it, has built. And if you need to make changes, or there are bugs in it, or perhaps there are really bad ways it's programmed stuff, you can recognize that actually that's rubbish. I need to fix that and sort that out. I mean, I just had a conversation with someone earlier this week talking specifically about AI in engineering and the recognition that, yeah, it's great at the moment, everyone's using it. In about 5 years' time, there are going to be so many security holes and flaws in companies that are purely using AI to build their websites and stuff like that, that actually jobs in engineering are going to be 10 to the dozen, because everyone's having to go through and fix all this security and all the flaws that the AI tools have built.
Yeah, it's definitely going to happen. Let me ask a question or put a scenario to that I'm definitely seeing more and more. So let's say I'm a technical leader. I'm running a team of engineers. I've got some of the people of the engineers are working to the normal standards that the company have set. I've then got a couple of people who are saying, I can't work to those standards. That doesn't work for me. And that might be hours working. It might be the office work. It could be lots of different things. And that person's disclosed to you they're neurodivergent. So what they're asking for is an adjustment to what the company policy is. How do you deal with that as a tech leader?
I think it all depends. A lot of it will depend on the company you're working for. I think there are companies out there who are already saying, no, we have to have everyone back in the office. Pros and cons of that, but that's, again, another conversation. I think having reasonable adjustments for somebody who perhaps, and I can think of somebody who I worked with that needed an extra long lunchtime because they needed a break. They had a medical condition they had to take some drugs for, basically had to have an hour to an hour and a half after which they took those medicines before they could start work again. And that's the reason you basically say, yeah, fine. Instead of working 9 to 5, you work, 8:30, 5:30, and you just have that extra bit of lunch. Things like that I think are reasonable. I think, especially if you're home working, yes, there are certain core parts of the day that you'd expect somebody to be around for, particularly in the engineering world, around agile and sprint ceremonies. But actually, if they want to start work at 10 o'clock when stand up is, and finish at 6, 7 o'clock at night, rather than starting at 8:30, 9, whatever it is, for me, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And even outside of quote neurodivergency, as a parent, there's quite often where I'm dropping my kid off at school and I won't be back till 9:15. Yet the hours on my contract might say 8:30 or 9 o'clock. But actually, as a company as a whole, I think giving that flexibility to staff to do those sorts of things, whether it's because they are a parent or whether it's because they perhaps stay up later at night because that's their natural body clock, I think that's that's a fair adjustment to make. I think if people are starting to take the mick, that's where I think it becomes, if somebody says, no, I can only work, when there's an M in the day or whatever, those sorts of silly things, I think that's where things are getting unreasonable. So it's just about reasonable and fair sort of working practices, whether you're neurodivergent or not. And I think that's the key thing, is the way you manage people, the way you have conversations with your team is about what is fair for everybody, whilst recognizing that certain people need certain extra things. And like you say, person who has medicine at lunchtime that needs an extra hour, that sort of stuff. The person who wants to work in a dark environment, the person who, because the way their body is, wants to get up and not start work till 10 o'clock. Just making those reasonable adjustments, whether you're neurodivergent or not, I think is for me is good practice.
Yeah, no, definitely. I got some training once. I'm going to shout out another recruiting company here by somebody called Mark Crawley, who specializes in neurodivergence recruitment. So he only recruits neurodiverse people within technology.
Yeah. And
he did some training. And one of the things he sort of showed to me or opened my eyes to was equity. So that feeling that exactly what you were just saying there, where sometimes some people need something different to give them the ability to work at the same level as somebody else in their team. So somebody in your team might have to have that longer lunchtime. I've worked with somebody before who was amazing in short sprints. Like, she would get a crazy amount done within an hour and 2 hours, but then would crash.
Yeah.
And go, right, I need a break
from
that. So we all understood that and knew that you had to treat her slightly differently to get the best out of her for the business. I think that's a real tough place for a leader to be in, because you're quite often sandwiched between wanting to do what's right by your team, and then also the people above you are going, we need these outcomes by tomorrow. Have you ever found yourself in that situation where you sort of, I know what's right for my team, but the company asked me to do this? I'm in a really tricky situation.
I think every team goes through that. The MD, your chairman of the company, coming down to you saying, actually, we need this by 10 o'clock tonight. You're like, do you want it done properly, or do you want it just blasted out and it might have all sorts of security flaws? And again, I think it's as a leader and as a hopefully a good, in my position, engineering manager, it's about that communication. It's about going to the team going, right, come on, guys, we're being really pushed this. What's realistic? What can we do well enough quickly? But actually, and getting everybody involved in that, whether it's a team of 2 or a team of 20, getting everybody involved in that to understand what the requirement is, because there's going to be a requirement and a reason why you're being asked to do it in that time frame. What's reasonable? And then you, as the engineering manager, then go back to the stakeholder and say, right, we've had a conversation in the team. This is what we can do. And then you sort of, start considering tech debt and post-event work and stuff like that. So if you're having to develop something by 10 o'clock tonight, maybe that's extreme, but it's still quite possible. Right, what can we realistically do in that 10 o'clock time? To then saying, right, if we do this, we then need X amount of time after it to then tidy things up, get rid of the tech debt, or fix any loopholes, or improve the flow, or whatever it might be. And I think, again, that comes down to being a good manager, of being that communicator, because ultimately, as a manager, yes, you're managing the team, but you're the voice of that team to the stakeholders. And that, for me, and I'm not saying I'm not perfect or anything like that, but a good engineering manager, a good VP of engineering, whatever role it is about taking the expertise you've got in the team, understanding things, putting to them what the situation is and why there are perhaps time constraints or delivery constraints or whatever it is, understanding what is reasonable and what is fair on them in terms of delivery, and then go back to stakeholders and saying, look, this is where we'll get to. We can do it by X time, but blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Another thing I'd be worried about if I was a leader in the current setup, again, around the adjustments piece. So again, let's say I've got somebody in the team who's neurodiverse, they've disclosed, and let's say they need more regular breaks throughout the day.
Yeah.
So the rest of the team aren't getting those breaks, but that person is getting their breaks. Obviously, the leader's doing the right thing. He's doing the equity thing and making sure that that person's getting what they need. But I'd be worried about resentment in the rest of the team.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
Have you ever seen that happen?
I don't think I have. Well, I've certainly not recognised it, which might be poor on my part.
Might have managed it well in the first place.
Or might have managed it well in the first place. But I think, in my situation now, where I'm taking my kids to school a couple of times a week and picking them up, because I have to pick them up, sort of 3, 3:30, whatever it is. I think if you can, and if I think back to when I was just an engineer and not a manager, if I was being given those, I think there needs to be recognition from the person who's getting those, quote, reasonable adjustments, whether it be extra breaks or bit of time at lunchtime, whatever it is. I think there's a certain expectation on their part to make it clear, not necessarily saying, I must have these breaks, but in the way they're working, so that, if you're getting extra breaks during the day, you do an extra little bit at the beginning and the end of the day. Because, a lot of companies don't work on thou shalt work 9 till 5, but if you're working, if your team works roughly 9 till 5 and you get an hour for lunch, and maybe the expectation is you'll have a coffee in the morning and go and get a drink in the afternoon. If somebody needs those little extra breaks, think about the old days when people used to smoke. And I think it's exactly the same. If they're taking those breaks, just putting that little bit extra in at either the beginning and the end of the day, or having a shorter lunch so you can spread it out, I think it then, and not shouting to, top of the hills, this is what I'm doing, but just sort of trying to make it clear that, I'm finishing at 5:30, 6 instead of 5. But then you as a manager recognizing that and helping them vocalize that so that there isn't that resentment.
Yeah.
And yeah, just sort of managing that way, I think is probably the best way of doing it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, it is tricky because, and again, outside the neurodivergent world, people who've got sort of medical issues where perhaps they need to go to a doctor's a couple of times a week or whatever it is, again, you need to give them that time to get through whatever medical issue it is, but there will be resentment from the team if they're having extra time off. But again, it's managing that can be difficult as well. That's probably a complete minefield of, can you disclose that somebody's got medical issues? Well, no, you can't, but you need to sort of say to them, well, yeah, but the team are going to be resenting you for what you're doing. So at some point, we probably need to tell them something and things like that. It's always difficult.
So the slight counter to what you're saying there about if you take some extra breaks, make it the day or begin the end of the day, should we be managing purely on output?
Well, I didn't say that, but I was sort of, and yeah, in hindsight, probably, yeah, I think it probably is. And going back to your person where you're saying, the person you were talking about a few minutes ago, where you're saying, they put very high levels of output in for a short period and then need a break. But again, I think there is a certain expectation that people need to work a certain number of hours, which is across the world, is recognized in whatever industry you're in. But whether that's working fully or actually, I can think of an old senior manager of a company that I used to work for many, many years ago. He used to do his Monday morning sales call. So I didn't work for him, I just knew of it. He had a load of field salespeople. So they're all from, but every Monday morning, 9 till 10, they had a call updating everything. And they all had to give an update of what they were doing and the area managers and stuff like that. He used to do that whilst walking his dog. Mm-hmm. But that was his right. I'm not in the office yet. I don't need to be in the office because I've got 30, 40 salespeople out on the road who are now going to give me all their updates, which he'll have probably had in a report anyway. But actually what he's doing is just walking his dog out in the field with his mobile phone, listening and having an interaction. But that actually meant he wasn't in the office. So he was having that break. So and I've never done it, but maybe I should do a meeting from my bike, go out for a bike ride and just listen into a meeting from a bike, because that's also thinking, it is also thinking time. So you might not be directly working on your computer or on your laptop, whatever it is, but you're still thinking about time, thinking about work during the time that you're doing it. And there's a joke in my team that I quite often if I'm awake during the night, I will message my team on chat with some far-flung idea that I've come up with at 4:00 in the morning. And the standard joke is, oh, you were awake at 4:00 this morning thinking about work again. Well, yes, I was, but that's because I was awake and a whole load of reasons why that happens. But, I might then not be in work till 9:15 because I've done school run. So it's just sort of recognizing, and yes, output is hugely important, but there are people that, and again, it's just about managing all the different traits and skills and ways of working within your team. Like you said, some people will work for an hour, absolutely blast it out, but then need an hour's break. But there are some people who will just drip throughout the day to a good enough output quality. But it's just all the different ways of working. And I think I don't think it's necessarily about resentment from the other people. It's just as a manager, trying to say to people, right, this person works that way better. Let them do it. You work this way. You have your own, reasonable adjustments, whatever you want to call it. But actually that person might work just like working 9 to 5, had an hour's lunch, but their output's great. But then, like you say, there's the person who does an hour in the morning that does the equivalent of 4 hours work of somebody else that then is like completely burnt out in that 4 hours.
Yeah.
It's just about good management, good people management, which in engineering can be really difficult. Again, because of the number of people who have certain traits, neurodivergency, whatever you want to call it.
Do you think there's a nervousness from tech leaders about managing people who are neurodiverse for a worry they get it wrong?
I think that's probably the same across any industry. I don't just think it's in the technical world, but it's probably more prevalent in the technical world, I think, because there are more neurodivergent people in the technical world. But then I think it's about training. It's about good senior management is about recognizing that actually having neurodivergent people working for us, particularly in a technical world, can be massively beneficial. And it's just about making sure you've got the right people in the right place to manage. If you're a CTO or an IT director, whatever it is, having a good engineering manager who can recognize and build on the qualities and the traits that you've got within those teams.
Yeah. If I'm a leader right now and I'm really worried about it, I'm worried about getting it wrong, I'm worried about the repercussions of that, I'm worried about all this stuff, what would you recommend?
I think define getting it wrong, because I think that's and again, we started off this conversation by saying we're going to talk about neurodiversity. We're not necessarily get the politically correct words right, but we're going to do our best to talk about it in a positive way and how you can deal with it. And I think that's the same with from a management point of view. I think it's about not necessarily, obviously you don't want to do anything negative and talk about it in a negative light, but there are times where I think having conversations with somebody to say, look, I think these are your sort of traits. And again, it's about that one-to-one confidence. I think I recognize these traits, but perhaps we need to work on X, Y, and Z. And those there are a way, and then working with them as a sort of good professional development sort of plan, working with them to perhaps improve those certain areas, but recognizing that perhaps some areas you can't work on at all and are complete barriers to them. So I don't think anybody should ever be worried about it. I think just like with anything, and the world of HR is a complete minefield as it is, yes, I think you need to make sure you're not discriminating and all stuff like that, but try and talk about these subjects in a positive way. Yeah. And going back to my son, the conversations I'm having with him are trying to talk about the fact that, yes, he finds things difficult in certain areas and finds certain things difficult, but we can overcome that. And whether it's working with the school, whether it's working with the SEND team at school, or whether it's actually, I really struggled in maths today to understand it in the lesson because whatever reason, coming home and going, Dad, can you help with my maths? And it's about that, managing a child can be very similar to particularly an older child. It's sort of, approaching their teens can be very similar to managing somebody in your team. It's about building that trust relationship, building that understanding between you that if they need help, they can come to you. But also you can say to them, look, why don't you think about doing this?
How have you got better at doing it?
I think age. No, I think it's been really interesting. If I look back now, and again, I've talked about the sort of 2 or 3 people that you've recruited for me over the years, and we can talk about those names afterwards. Not. But I think for me, it's about recognizing the value in each person. And that's probably what I've got better at, of recognizing, and that's whether they're neurodivergent or not, is about being able to understand where somebody's strengths are and where their weaknesses are, and what weaknesses can you help them improve, or what are just traits that you're just not going to be able to get around. Most traits, I think, in the neurodivergent world are workable in terms of you can work around them. Because why would they have applied for the job or done the degree or learn what they have to come into the world that they're in, certainly technology and engineering? Because, you look at a lot of, and again, I can think of some sort of early to mid-20s engineers that are coming through at the moment. They're absolutely neurodivergent, but they've been programming since they were 10.
Yeah.
Whereas back in my day, and I show my age now, I couldn't program when I was 10 because there weren't the computers to program on. Okay, my idea of programming probably when I was about 10 was I had a BBC Micro that I was getting a magazine once a month and typing in the game that was within the magazine. Yeah, there weren't discs or cassettes there might have been. But it is a very different world now to what it was 30, 40 years ago. Whereas I think there are a lot more engineers coming through that are self-taught, that have learnt it during school, and have a massive head start on us, who, I'm nearly 50. I didn't touch a proper programming language till I was 18, 19. Whereas they'll have done it for nearly 10 years by then. That's scary. I mean, and there are some really, really good tools out there for children in, again, another sort of slight off topic. There are really, really good tools out there for children who are perhaps wanting to get an interest in programming, game making, whatever it is. There's the Stitch program. There's a Barclays setup. I can't remember the name of it.
I'll try and find out. But
yeah. But all of those tools that for children who are interested in getting into engineering, building software, websites, whatever it is, there are these tools that they can learn at a young age to start that sort of programming world, that engineering world of basically problem solving. And that's what it comes down to. Even my son's Lego robot that you can program to do a series of steps. I mean, it's probably a bit old for it now, but you can program it to do a series of steps to complete a task, going around a sort of grid board of picking up letters in the right order or something like that. Those sort of simple stages of children in schools or children of school age wanting to become in the world of engineering. That's a really good start.
Yeah. On that, do you think the world is getting better at creating especially the tech world, is it getting better at creating a better place for neurodivergent?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think I wonder if the tech world has sort of gone through a phase, should we say, of 20 years ago, say, where there were clearly neurodivergent people in the tech world, but they weren't really recognized as neurodivergent. They were just there. We've then gone through that phase of, neurodivergency, blah, blah, blah. But actually now we're coming out the other side, recognizing that actually having neurodivergent people in the tech world is good because some of them are absolutely bloody brilliant and can problem solve like that. And you look at, the Elon Musks, the Bill Gates, certainly Elon Musk is clearly neurodivergent, but actually some of his problem solving back in the day of when he was working in PayPal and Facebook and stuff like that, he wasn't Facebook, was he? He was just PayPal. Yeah. But, clearly what he was doing there around sort of building out technology and stuff like that was, clear signposts going, actually, neurodivergent people are good to have in the tech world.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that's framed positively. And I feel that's, for anybody who's listening who's neurodivergent, I feel that's a positive thing. Touch a little bit on the evolving role of a leader. So, do you think the job of a leader has changed over the last 5 to 10 years? And in what way?
I don't think it's changed, in my view. Mm-hmm. I think it's evolved. And there are reasons why I'm using those semantical things, because I don't think as a engineering manager, as a CTO, I don't think there is any difference in terms of what we're being expected to manage. But I think the way you're having to manage now is a lot different. And I think COVID, home working, I think had a massive effect on that. Bringing the sort of neurodivergent conversation into that, I don't think it's any different. I just think there's more recognition that, people have these neurodivergent qualities, traits, whatever you want to call it, and actually managing those is much more expected of as a manager. Whereas perhaps 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't that expectation. You just managed people and got on with it. Whereas actually now you need to manage the person more.
Yeah. Well, that sort of leads me on to the next question, because I was going to say, as a leader, you've got all the tech advancements that are happening right now. You've got to stay on top of that. Go, right, okay, yeah.
Well, I don't think you do, but that's, again, another conversation.
Well, at least one eye on it. And then you've got the people element, which again is constantly evolving, especially with terminology and stuff like that. How the hell do you stay on top of all that?
So I think there is a difference here. So I think it's interesting the way companies are now restructuring, particularly their software engineering teams, perhaps differently. And it's probably the same in the other engineering aspects, where you'll have obviously your normal junior, mid-senior, and then you've got sort of your principals who are your technical specialists, but then you've got your managers who are perhaps your more people managers. Now, I would not say I'm a technical specialist at all. I'm hopefully good at understanding technology, but I'm not a specialist with expertise in X, Y, and Z. Actually, where I think my personal qualities are best placed is, yes, that people management and the communication. As a manager, that is where I think things have perhaps differed, whereas 10, 15 years ago, there was probably an expectation that you probably had that expertise. Whereas I think now there's more recognition that the roles are split. So you'll have your principal developers, your principal engineers, your architects sort of supporting the engineering team, whereas you as the engineering manager are perhaps looking at more delivery, project management a bit, and that people management, and then the communication to stakeholders, which I think is that's probably more whether that's the engineering world that's changed, but that's sort of where my career has progressed in terms of the different roles I've had.
Yeah, okay. Do you think it's harder or easier to be a tech leader?
It's probably easier because there is so much more tech out there and recognition that tech in business is far more important. You look at the number of companies now and I can think of the 7 or 8 companies that I've worked over in the last 20 odd years. Some of them in the very beginning were very much tech led, whereas I think a lot of them weren't. Whereas actually now companies that are in the world of whether it's website or even product, physical product delivery, have a recognition that tech is so required to, whether it's save costs, have great output, great customer service, et cetera, et cetera. It's recognition that actually money needs to be spent in the tech world rather than it just being, that's just a nice thing to have over there. Us, the IT department, we don't need to worry about them. They just make our life difficult by giving us laptops that don't work. Whereas actually in the world now, and it's interesting when you think sort of when you're changing jobs, looking at what companies you want to work for, I can't think of many companies that won't have a tech, certainly a reasonably sized company that won't have a tech team that are delivering something for them. That might be outsourced or whatever, but they've still got that tech team that's delivering some of the core functionality within their business.
Every company is a software company these days.
Exactly.
There you go.
Exactly.
Okay, final question. So no, Dory, it's not a hard one. So if you could go back in time to your first leadership role, what would you do differently?
Oh, what would I do differently? I think if I think of the main leadership role I had, I think I would probably ask for the role to be defined more, because I sort of fell into the role. It was a bedroom startup, massively successful, and all of a sudden I was made IT director. But actually, what did that mean?
Yeah,
and that's what we're looking at, 2012, 2013. Right, you're IT director. What's that mean?
Yeah.
What are the expectations of me, both I suppose from management, senior management, the owners, but also from the teams. And I think that's something which I've learned over the years to recognize, is that you're not just delivering stuff for your management. You're, as a manager, you're also delivering stuff for your team. And so you need to understand from them what their expectations of you are. And that will differ from person to person, from team to team. And again, talking about that neurodivergent world, your team members will have different expectations of you and different levels of trust and all this sort of stuff. And building up that understanding of, right, guys, this is what I'm going to do for you, but this is also what you need to do for me, both up and down that sort of management chain.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Been a really good conversation.
Yeah, it has.
Thanks
very much.
Quick fire.
Okay, go on.
First thing that comes into your head when I ask these questions, okay? Don't put too much pressure on it.
That's all right.
Fine. First one, best advice ever received?
The customer isn't always right.
Nice. AI, for or against?
On the fence.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And there's reasons for that. I think it's great in certain areas. And again, talking about neurodivergency, it's I use a really good example of my son, who last summer before, was really into sort of Marvel and the concept of doing plays and drama. And had said to, I think it was his teacher at school, I really want to write a play. clearly he was never going to sit down and write a play. So what he did was she loaded him onto ChatGPT and then shared the login with me. So we did it at home as well. And he basically wrote this synopsis of a play of around a series of Marvel characters and came out with a 4-act play, which is absolutely brilliant. And then we read through it and he went, oh, I don't like that bit. So we went back to ChatGPT and he learned how to ask ChatGPT to change things. So actually for somebody like, and again, we're talking about sort of neurodivergency, somebody who perhaps struggles in the creative world, but has some really good ideas, but can't put it down on paper. Having that ability to use tools like AI to help him develop those things, I think is great. But he was then able to read through it afterwards. And yes, there's quite a few times where me, my partner, my son, maybe other family members were sat there in the lounge reading through these plays, reading funny voices and all that stuff. It was quite fun. But, he was able to recognize, actually, that bit doesn't quite work, or there's not enough action in there or something like that. And he was able to go back to it. So that's where I'm for it. Why against is far too many people are trying to use it to do things that they're not skilled at. And engineering and software is a classic one of those. And I think we said earlier in the podcast, companies out there using AI of some sorts to write software, to write websites without any knowledge of what they're doing. And that's where I think in the next 5 years, engineering is going to, at the moment, it feels like engineering is going down the route of you don't need as many engineers because you can just use AI. No, actually what you can use AI for in engineering is making things quicker, as in producing things quicker, but you still need the engineers to check on the quality.
Yeah.
Because AI is not there yet.
I think the vibe coding is going to blow up.
I don't think it's going to blow up. I just think it's going to be, you still need engineers to do the coding.
Yeah.
And companies like Copilot and Gemini and GitHub are all sort of going down that road of providing tools in AI to help engineers produce what they're producing. But I don't think they can do it solely for them. I still think you need that engineer, that human element to go, actually, that's a massive security flaw. Or, hang on, we're sharing payment details over a non-secure API or something like that. I still think you need the human element, the proper engineer to do that.
I've seen that play out a lot.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen a lot. Cool. Okay.
Sorry, that wasn't very quick.
Like, people want to hear that opinion on it.
Yeah.
Big time. One piece of tech you can live without.
One piece of tech, not my phone, or my home assistant at home. One piece of tech I can live without. Oh.
Talk about it.
I don't know. Email.
Okay, yeah.
Probably could do without email.
Yeah. Okay. One book or audio book you would recommend to somebody? Or podcast or something like that.
Book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yes, nice.
It's classic, but actually it's got a lot of sort of engineering sort of things in it. The whole, how did 42 come about? Podcast, obviously this one.
Of course.
Yeah. No Such Thing as a Fish.
What's that?
You not heard of that one? So QI.
Yeah.
And have you heard of the QI elves, who are basically all the researchers in the background? They do a weekly podcast, and it's sort of a comical one where there's 4 of them, and they'll each read out a fact, and then they sort of spin around that fact and talk about it and talk about things all related to it.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's quite a good one. Yeah, and then I've just been listening to on my way driving here this morning. They had one with Miles Jupp, aka the comedian and guy who used to be on Balamory.
Yeah.
So and he's very funny. But yeah, so they have guests on and stuff like that.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great recommendation. Okay, if you weren't in tech, what would you do?
Probably something helping people related.
Yeah.
Don't know what.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Morning routine?
Morning routine is spend as long as I can lazing around in bed. No, get up, have breakfast, see my other half out the door, and then normally just wander down the garden to my garden office and start the day. Nothing complex.
Cool.
I should probably go for a bike ride every morning, but don't always.
Exercise on your bed.
Yeah. Oh, and check the chickens.
Oh, you got chickens?
Yeah, I got 3 chickens.
Awesome.
So yeah, so we have to check the eggs and check the food and water and stuff like that.
Our father's got chickens. It's great. I love
Yeah.
the chicken. That's awesome. What's one thing you wish you would have done sooner as a leader?
Wish I'd sooner. Ooh. Probably a bit what we were talking about when you sort of said to me, what would you have changed in one of the roles? Probably defined roles a lot earlier. Yeah. So rather than just starting for a company and going with it, is actually starting my job, whatever company I was doing, and going, right, what are your expectations of me?
Have the confidence to ask that question.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Favourite food?
Pardon?
Favourite food?
Favourite food? It's got to be a good English breakfast.
Brilliant. What takes up most of your time in the day?
Takes most of time. Right now, planning.
Okay.
Which probably about 2/3 of my time at the moment is planning the projects that we've got coming up, which is enjoyable because it's, that's not just problem solving, because the role I'm in is doing a bit of product work as well. So I get a really good mix of some of the technical stuff, some of the product stuff, customer solutioning and things like that.
Excellent.
So that's quite fun.
Final one. If your team had to describe you in no more than 3 words, what would they say?
Oh, 3 words. That's the one you asked me about a month ago, and I said I was going to think about it. And likes to talk. Probably is the what? Yeah, that's probably what that's
perfect for a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
There we
are.
Brilliant, James. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Cheers.
brilliant.